Chapter 17 of Lavender and Old Lace. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Bridget. Lavender and Old Lace by Myrtle Reed. Chapter 17 Dawn. As Miss Ainslie became weaker, she clung to Carl, and was never satisfied when he was out of her sight. When she was settled in bed for the night, he went in to sit by her and hold her hand until she dropped asleep. If she woke during the night, she would call Ruth and ask where he was. "He'll come over in the morning, Miss Ainslie," Ruth always said. "You know it's night now." "Is it?" she would ask, drowsily. "I must go to sleep then, dearie, so that I may be quite rested and refreshed when he comes." Her room, in contrast to the rest of the house, was almost Puritan in its simplicity. The bed and dresser were mahogany, plain but highly polished, and she had a mahogany rocker with a cushion of old blue tapestry. There was a simple white cover on the bed, and another on the dresser, but the walls were dead white, unrelieved by pictures or draperies. In the east window was a long, narrow footstool, and a prayer book and hymnal lay on the window sill, where this maiden of half a century, looking seaward, knelt to say her prayers. One morning, when Ruth went in, she said, "I think I won't get up this morning, dear. I am so very tired. If Carl should come over, will you say that I should like to see him?" She would see no one but Carl and Ruth, and Mrs. Ball was much offended because her friend did not want her to come upstairs. "Don't be harsh with her, Aunt Jane," pleaded Ruth. "You know people often have strange fancies when they are ill. She sent her love to you, and asked me to say that she thanked you, but you need not put the light in the attic window any more." Mrs. Ball gazed at her niece long and earnestly. "Be you tellin' me the truth?" she asked. "Why, of course, Aunty." "Then Mary Ainslie has got sense from somewheres. There ain't never been no need for that lamp to set in the winder, and when she gets more sense I reckon she'll be willin' to see her friends." With evident relief upon her face, Mrs. Ball departed. But Miss Ainslie seemed quite satisfied, and each day spoke more lovingly to Ruth and Carl. He showed no signs of impatience, but spent his days with her cheerfully. He read to her, held her hand, and told her about the rug, the marquee, and the Japanese lovers. At the end she would always say, with a quaint tenderness, "And someone who loved me brought it to me." Yes, Miss Ainslie, someone who loved you. Everybody loves you, don't you know that? "Do you?" she asked once, suddenly and yet shyly. "Indeed I do, Miss Ainslie. I love you with all my heart." She smiled happily and her eyes filled. "Ruth," she called softly, "he says he loves me." "Of course he does," said Ruth. "Nobody in the wide world could help loving you." She put out her left hand to touch Ruth, and the amethyst ring slipped off, for her fingers were thin. She did not seem to notice when Ruth slipped it on again, and shortly afterward fell asleep. That night Winfield stayed very late. "I don't want to leave you, dear," he said to Ruth. "I'm afraid something is going to happen." "I'm not afraid. I think you'd better go." "Will you put a light in your window if you want me, darling?" "Yes, I will." "I can see it from my room, and I'll be watching for it. If you want me, I'll come." He awoke from an uneasy sleep, with the feeling that Ruth needed him, and was not surprised to see the light from her candle streaming out into the darkness. He dressed hurriedly, glancing at his watch by the light of a match. It was just 3 o'clock. Ruth was waiting for him at the lower door. "Is she " "No, she seems to be just the same, but she wants you. She's been calling for you ever since you went away." As they went upstairs, Miss Ainslie's sweet voice came to them, in pitiful pleading. "Carl, Carl, dear, where are you? I want you." "I'm here, Miss Ainslie," he said, sitting down on the bed beside her, and taking her hot hands in his. "What can I do for you?" "Tell me about the rug." With no hint of weariness in his deep, quiet voice, he told her the old story once more. When he had finished, she spoke again. "I can't seem to get it just right about the Japanese lovers. Were they married?" "Yes, they were married and lived happily ever afterward, like the people in the fairy tales." "That was lovely," she said, with evident satisfaction. "Do you think they wanted me to have their vase?" "I know they did. Someone who loved you brought it to you. Everybody loves you, Miss Ainslie." "Did the Marquis find her lover?" "Yes, or rather, he found her." "Did they want me to have their marquetry table?" "Of course they did. Didn't someone who loved you bring it to you?" "Yes," she sighed, "someone who loved me." She sang a little, very softly, with her eyes closed. It was a quaint, old fashioned tune, with a refrain of "Hush a bye," and he held her hand until the song ceased and she was asleep. Then he went over to Ruth. Can't you go to sleep for a little while, dearest? I know you're tired." "I'm never tired when I'm with you," Ruth answered, leaning upon his arm, "and besides, I feel that this is the end." Miss Ainslie slept for some time, then, all at once, she started as if in terror. "Letters," she said, very distinctly. "Go." He went to her and tried to soothe her, but failed. "No," she said again, "letters Ruth chest." "She wants some letters that are in the sandalwood chest," he said to Ruth, and Miss Ainslie nodded. "Yes," she repeated, "letters." Ruth went into the sitting room, where a light was burning dimly, but the chest was locked. "Do you know where the key is, Carl?" she asked, coming back for a moment. "No, I don't, dear," he answered. Then he asked Miss Ainslie where the key was, but she only murmured "letters." "Shall I go and help Ruth find them?" "Yes," she said, "help letters." Together they broke open the lock of the chest, while Miss Ainslie was calling, faintly, "Carl, Carl, dear, where are you? I want you." "We'd better turn the whole thing out on the floor," he said, suiting the action to the word, "then put it back against the wall empty." "We'll have to shake everything out carefully," returned Ruth. "That's the only way to find them." Wrapped carefully in a fine linen sheet was Miss Ainslie's wedding gown, of heavy white satin, trimmed simply with priceless Venetian point. They shook it out hurriedly and put it back into the chest. There were yards upon yards of lavender taffeta, cut into dress lengths, which they folded up and put away. 3 strings of amethyst and 2 of pearls slipped out of the silk as they lifted it, and there was another length of lustrous white taffeta, which had changed to an ivory tint. 4 shawls of Canton crape, 3 of them lavender and 1 ivory white, were put back into the chest. There were several fans, of fine workmanship, a girdle of oxidized silver, set with amethysts and pearls, and a large marquetry box, which contained tea. "That's all the large things," he said. "Now we can look these over." Ruth was gathering up great quantities of lace Brussels, Point d'Alencon, Cluny, Mechlin, Valenciennes, Duchesse, and Venetian point. There was a bridal veil of the Venetian lace, evidently made to match that on the gown. Tiny, dried petals rustled out of the meshes, for Miss Ainslie's laces were laid away in lavender, like her love. "I don't see them," she said. "Yes, here they are." She gave him a bundle of yellowed letters tied with lavender ribbon. "I'll take them to her," he answered, picking up a small black case that lay on the floor and opening it. "Why, Ruth," he gasped, "it's my father's picture." Miss Ainslie's voice rose again in pitiful cadence. "Carl, Carl, dear, where are you? I want you oh, I want you." He hastened to her, leaving the picture in Ruth's hand. It was an ambrotype, set into a case lined with purple velvet. The face was that of a young man, not more than 25 or 30, who looked strangely like Winfield. The eyes, forehead, and the poise of the head were the same. The earth trembled beneath Ruth's feet for a moment, then, all at once, she understood. The light in the attic window, the marked paragraph in the paper, and the death notices. Why, yes, the Charles Winfield who had married Abigail Winfield was Miss Ainslie's lover, and Carl was his son. He went away. Miss Ainslie's voice came again to Ruth, when she told her story, with no hint of her lover's name. He went away, and soon afterward married Abigail Weatherby, but why? Was it love at first sight, or did he believe that his sweetheart was dead? Then Carl was born, and the mother died. 12 years afterward he followed her, broken hearted. Carl had told her that his father could not bear the smell of lavender, nor the sight of any shade of purple, and Miss Ainslie always wore lavender, and lived in the scent of it. Had he come to shrink from it through remorse? Why was it, she wondered? Had he forgotten Miss Ainslie, or had he been suddenly swept off his feet by some blind whirlwind of passion? In either case, memory had returned to torture him a thousandfold, to make him ashamed to face her, with his boy in his arms. And Aunt Jane knew of the marriage, at the time, probably, and said no word. Then she learned of Abigail Weatherby's death, and was still silent, hoping, perhaps, that the wanderer would come back, until she learned that Charles Winfield, too, was dead. And still she had not told Miss Ainslie, or possibly thought she knew it all till the day that Hepsey had spoken of, when she came home, looking strange, to keep the light in the attic window every night for more than 5 years. Was it kind? Ruth doubted for a moment, then her heart softened with love for Aunt Jane, who had hidden the knowledge that would be a death blow to Miss Ainslie, and let her live on, happy in her dream, while the stern, Puritan conscience made her keep the light in the attic window in fulfilment of her promise. As if the little light could reach the veil which hangs between us and eternity, or penetrate the greyness which never parts save